There's another important way in which we conform, and it has to do with the roles that we assume as social beings. This is not going to be the easiest lecture because I'm going to talk to you about an experiment conducted by this guy, Phil Zimbardo, in the basement of Stanford University's psychology department, and the implications of that study for the prisoner abuse that took place in the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq when the U.S. military was running that prison. Let me start by telling you about the Stanford Prison Study. To be honest, it's really not a study, it's more of a demonstration, but it's a powerful demonstration that shocked the field of psychology. It's also the kind of study or demonstration that no one could run today because there's lots of ethical violations, as you'll see here in a minute. But here was a study. The basic question was, what happens when you put good people in a bad situation? Does a situation dominate or determine what the people do? Or do good people always maintain their goodness no matter what the social situation, no matter what the role they've been assigned in that social situation? Phil Zimbardo set out to answer that question by recruiting a group of super healthy, super together people and randomly assigning those people to be either a prisoner or a prison guard in a prison that Zimbardo created in the basement of the psychology department at Stanford University. Now, what did the study actually look like? Well, Zimbardo placed an ad in the local newspaper. You can see a photograph of the ad in this slide, recruiting young men, college-age men, guys who were probably home for the summer, and promised to pay them $15 a day for up to 2 weeks to participate in a psychological study of prison life. All the people who responded to this newspaper ad were given tests to make sure that they were psychologically and physically healthy. And Zimbardo picked the healthiest men out of that group and randomly assigned each man to be either a guard in a prison or a prisoner in that prison. And he took it really seriously. The prison guards wore prison guard uniforms. The prisoners were arrested by the local police department. They were pulled out in front of their homes and handcuffed and placed in police cars and brought to this pseudo prison. Now, the guys in this study knew that their job was just to play at being a prisoner or being a prison guard. They didn't actually have to do anything. They were assigned these roles, but they could have ignored the roles. Heck, they could have sat around for 2 weeks and played poker and sang songs. But that isn't what happened at all. In fact, Zimbardo had to stop the study after 6 days because the prisoners were having psychological breakdowns and the prison guards were becoming sadistic and cruel. At first, again, everybody was healthy and strong, but within 36 hours, prisoners were completely defined by their roles as prisoners. So the prisoners were having mental breakdowns, crying. The guards became horrible. Again, they didn't have to do anything, but they would strip search the prisoners. They made them wear these nightgowns with these depersonalizing numbers attached to them, and they never referred to the prisoners by their names, but also always as the de-individuating numbers. When prisoners didn't do what the guards wanted, they would lock them up in solitary confinement or withhold meals. There was physical abuse. It was awful. So what we learned during the study is that young men who were randomly assigned the role of guards and knew that they had been randomly assigned for that role became abusive, both emotionally and physically. They verbally harassed the prisoners. They humiliated them. They tortured the prisoners. The students who had been recruited and randomly selected to be prisoners, and they knew it was random, they became passive. Remember, learned helplessness? They were withdrawn. They became helpless. So what Zimbardo learned from this study is that we will quickly conform to the social roles that we're assigned. As the quote puts it, what we do, we eventually become. So these undergraduates became prison guards and prisoners. It's terrible. Okay, that was in 1971. Let's fast forward here about 30 years to 2003. The U.S. is at war with Iraq. And there was a very famous, really infamous prison in Iraq known as, and I'm sorry for the mispronunciation, Abu Ghraib. And the U.S. military took over the prison once they got access to it and used the prison to house prisoners of war. It turned out that photographs proved that the soldiers who were running the prison were torturing the inmates. They were violating international rules of battle. The tortures were awful. They were using electrocution. They were threatening the men with death. They had the men stripped naked and shown to women soldiers while they were stripped naked. When the military found out about this, they immediately took the soldiers and placed them in prison and concluded that the soldiers were, and I quote, a few bad apples. In other words, that the military was not at fault, the U.S. government was not at fault, it was just these rogue soldiers acting on their own without any of their superiors knowing and torturing the prisoners. Now, these soldiers were charged in court, and when the government said that they were bad apples, Phil Zimbardo jumped in and testified on behalf of the soldiers to say, no. These aren't bad apples. The barrel is rotten. It's not the people, it's the situation. And he explained how everything that happened was predicted by his 1971 prison study. So on the question of, is it bad people or bad situations, Phil Zimbardo comes down very strongly on the power of the situation to make us act and behave in ways that we would never otherwise do. Okay.